Hi, this is Garibay, and today we're going to be talking about Andrew Yang and the defeat of Joe Biden, and specifically how the defeat of Joe Biden is something that Andrew Yang should ignore completely and should leave to another force. And the reason why he should do that is so that he can marshal his resources to defeat the people who are standing when Joe Biden falls. Okay? All right, so I've been thinking a lot about Joe Biden recently, and I'm incredibly disheartened by the powerful response of the Democrat voters for Joe Biden right out of the gate. Like, he has really strong leads in the polls, and it looks right now like he's going to run away with this primary race, right? If you're listening to the polls. Now, I don't think that Joe Biden's is gonna win. I think he's gonna be defeated. I think there's three sources of his defeat, right? And the point of this video right now is Andrew Yang. I love Andrew Yang. He's absolutely my number one candidate. I changed my voting registration from Republican to Democrat specifically so I could vote for Andrew Yang in April in the Pennsylvania primaries, right? All right. He's my number one candidate. I absolutely want him to be president, right? But I have a lot of concerns about Joe Biden, and I really think Andrew Yang has to have a plan. Now, that plan should be to ignore Joe Biden, allow Joe Biden's defeat to come from another source, and then be ready to strike figuratively, the other candidate politically and legally and ethically strike the other candidates as soon as Joe Biden falls. Okay, so let's talk about Joe Biden and what his fall would be. All right. So first and foremost, Joe Biden's he is the number one opponent, right, for the Democrat pack, right? And the reason why is he's Obama, right? That's the promise of Biden, is 4 to 8 more years of Obama. And I understand why that's so incredibly attractive to the Democrats, right? But here's why Andrew Yang should absolutely ignore him. So one, Andrew Yang is a brilliant genius, right? And he has a brilliant plan for our nation that is a perfectly crafted election race policy that will allow Andrew Yang to come in for governing policy. But here's the thing. Things that are too brilliant, too good, too perfect, the mainstream hates it, right? Like if it burns too bright, essentially the majority of people won't allow it in their lives, right? And Andrew Yang has that threat, right? He really is very much he really is, like, he's a bright shining star, and he's a long shot, right? So, but he can beat the odds, and I think he has to use a ton of tactics and strategy to do it. So let me give you the tactics and strategy. Because he's a long shot, right? And because he's a long shot, he's back far in the polls. He doesn't have a ton of money. He doesn't have the best political advisors that are available in America right now. He has to create something really significant with extremely limited resources. So that means he must focus, right? He has to focus. He can't put his attention on everything. He doesn't have the time and resources for it. He doesn't have the political advisor power. He doesn't have the money for it, and he doesn't have the time, okay? Because he's still trying to get his message out about UBI. And he has to do more messaging than most candidates because his policies are unusual. He has to educate people to understand what they are, and then he has to persuade them to try something new, right? So he is incredibly limited on resources. So for that reason, he should allow Joe Biden to be defeated by one of the three sources I'm going to talk about right now. So what's the first source that can defeat Joe Biden? The first source that can beat Joe Biden is Joe Biden himself. Joe Biden, in my opinion, is his absolute he's his own worst enemy, right? So one of the things that has been discovered recently is Joe Biden is not fully aware of how he should interact. By his own words, by Joe Biden's words, he doesn't understand personal space, right? And he doesn't give people the personal space that they need, right? So because of that, One, there's a probability that he's going to run into problems on the campaign trail with that exact issue. And the reason why is the way that he interacts with people, which is now by his words, not appropriate for our current era, and perhaps was never appropriate, right? He's going to have to get rid of 30, 40, 50 years of habits, right? He's going to be under incredible strain during the 9 months up to when the primaries start, right? And he's going to be in front of 1,000 cameras a day, right? So the probability that he's going to compound his own issues is quite likely, okay? Also, Joe Biden's age, he is 77 years old. He has to show hyper health and hyper acuity to the American people every single day for the next 9 months in front of 1,000 cameras, right? And there's a possibility that he's not going to be a bad candidate. He's just going to be a human being, right? If he falls downstairs, or if he bumbles over questions or has trouble remembering things, we're just not in a different time, man. Like with so many cameras on these candidates, right? If he shows even the slightest weakness, and it shows that he is not going to be able to bring the same health and the same acuity as these younger candidates, that is going to be super visible with today's media. And get this, in the 60s and even in the 70s, actually I think it ended in the 60s. The 40s, 50s, and 60s, presidents could have all kinds of problems. And the media be like, hey, don't worry about it. We got you covered. We know you need a little bit of space and some decorum so that you can have your dignity. Media ain't about that anymore. They will savage any candidate's dignity in a New York second. The media does not have any ability to control itself anymore. The media is truly it's like a dog, right? I know when you're feeding a dog, you don't put your hand in and try to grab a dog's food, right? It's not a bad dog that will bite your hand if you put your hand in front of a dog when it's trying to eat food, right? Any dog will bite your hand if you try to snatch its food out from it, right? That's just its nature. And the media is an eating dog now, right? It has absolutely no ability to allow any candidate to retain even a shred of dignity if that candidate gives them any footage that will savage their dignity. And that's the point, is every single day, like the rest of the people who are on the campaign, like nobody else on the campaign trail really needs to, well, Bernie Sanders needs to project. Everybody other than Bernie Sanders, they don't need to project hyper health and hyper acuity. They are healthy and they are super acute, right? And the reason why is not because they're better people or anything. It's just vitality of life, their youth gives them that advantage, right? Whereas Biden is going to need to project hyper health and hyper acuity absolutely constantly, and it's already starting. When he had his first public rally, people were like, oh man, he's missing some of his lines, he's missing some of his cues, he wasn't fresh, he wasn't sharp, right? And that's there's nothing wrong with that. He's 77 years old, right? Our society said 12 years ago, listen, why don't you take a check and start collecting retirement, because you shouldn't be this nation has no business asking you to work. They said that 12 years ago. He could have started collecting Social Security when he was 65, right? Basically our society allows you to collect Social Security when you're 65 years old. He is 12 years past the time when the entire nation says nobody has a right to ask you to work anymore. So he is going to have a very, very difficult time projecting hyper health and hyper acuity because he's 77 years old, right? So the first thing that can defeat Biden is Biden himself. Just let him do his thing on the campaign trail. Yang can ignore him, and Biden can take himself out, right? So that is a very real issue. The other issue is simply, so what is the other source? We already talked about that's right. So what is the other source of Biden's defeat? Well, it is incredibly well-funded tactical strategy fighters who are his competitors, like Elizabeth Warren, like Beto O'Rourke, like Bernie Sanders, like Amy Klobuchar, like who else is in the mix there? Oh, like Kamala Harris, right? Like Cory Booker, right? Every single one of these people is incented to go ethically and legally collect any scrap of embarrassment that could topple Joe Biden. And guess what? We already know there are things in Joe Biden's record that are public, right? So they can just, continue to rummage and do what they can to find content to show at the last minute, right? Like maybe like December, January, right? To take him out in the primaries. And if any of those well-funded establishment candidates topple Joe Biden, then Andrew Yang gets that for free, right? If he does nothing, if he spends no time and no effort and no resources to defeat Joe Biden, what he can do is he can develop his plan to beat those specific people. I think the only people he's really running against anymore is Bernie Sanders, Beto O'Rourke, Peter Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar and Kamala Harris. That's it. Those are his only real opponents, and nobody else matters, right? Like all the rest of those candidates, they got no chance, right? But if Andrew Yang realizes what I'm saying right now, does a tactical maneuver and says, I'm not going to invest one single ounce of my time, money, energy, or thought on Joe Biden because I'm going to let others take him down, then he's right. Because the reality is all those other much more well-funded candidates are highly incented to do the work Andrew Yang needs to be done, and he can get the benefit for free, and he can cut. And when Joe Biden falls, right, because somebody found some piece of information that will topple him in this election, right, then at that point, if Andrew Yang is ready to just cut off at the knees, figuratively, all the rest of those candidates I just talked about, then he really gains leverage, he gains momentum, and he is using his resources as best as he possibly can, right? So the things that can topple Biden are Biden himself. The other thing that can topple him is the other much more well-funded candidates who are running in the 2020 primary as well, who will do Andrew Yang's job for free, which I think is that's definitely the best way to go. And the last one, I think, is the last one is a point in time issue. Okay, point in time issue. What's that, right? Well, here's the thing. All of these candidates, a point in time issue is a big old, it's a black swan, it's an asterisk, it's an unpredictable event, right? So every single one of these candidates is doing the best job they can to keep things moving, right? But and the Democrat Party is doing what they, is doing what they can to forward all their candidates so they have a good candidate for the general election. All the candidates are doing the best they can to get their message out, right? And the government is moving along, doing its thing to make sure that the cogs keep turning for the American people, right? But and then the American people are watching this entire mechanism for the election race, right? Turning around, they're just observing. But here's the kicker, right? America and the world itself is a massively complex moving objects, massive collection of moving objects, and things that are never expected can happen. You can have a cultural event. Notre Dame just burned to the ground, right? Actually, it didn't burn. Notre Dame just burned. That's a better way of putting that. Who would have expected, right, that France would need to gather $1 billion to rebuild one of its greatest cultural assets? No one, right? And so that's the point, is there could be a war that breaks out. There could be some kind of major human accomplishment. Cancer could be cured. What happens if cancer is cured between now and the election, right? And what happens if the research for that was maybe funded by one of the candidates, right? That's the entire point. Is there is a point in time issue that can absolutely crush Joe Biden, right? There's an event that could happen, and if Joe's not ready to deal with it, or if it puts Joe in a different light, or if it takes one candidate and just skyrockets them to the top, right? That's the other thing that can topple Joe Biden, is a point in time event, something that is completely unpredictable, and they happen all the time, right? And especially with America and the world, there's just all kinds of things that could occur that could really change the level, right? So I think what Andrew Yang should do is develop a very sound plan to defeat Bernie Sanders, to defeat Buttigieg, to defeat Warren, to defeat Amy Klobuchar, to defeat Kamala Harris, right? To defeat Beto O'Rourke. If he does that, he's set, right? He's ready to go. And then the other thing is just keep moving. Never stop. Never give up. Never allow a single day to go by without continuing that message to be pushed forward. I really think this is the best way for Andrew Yang to handle the situation of Joe Biden. That's my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful day.